Hey.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Bailey.
And this is the Hell is a Teenage Girl podcast, episode 2. And today we're talking about ginger snaps.
We are, yeah.
So I've got a synopsis here, a plot summary. So basically, I'm going to read that out.
Okay.
And then we're going to go through the movie, act by act, talk about the major themes, major plot points. And also we've got a couple articles that we're going to bring into the conversation at some point. There's so much writing and so much like literature with this movie.
Yeah.
Honestly, with Jennifer's Body as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the reason why there's probably like so much like writing about this movie is that because you know, even though Jennifer's Body was like such like a monumental moment in horror, and I think that it sort of like kind of paved the way, or it sort of was like a pillar in like the sort of like subgenre of horror that is sort of like the more like girl focused sort of like comedic horror. I feel like Ginger Snaps was like the one that really started it.
Yeah. And it precedes Jennifer's Body by like 9 years or something.
It does, yeah.
I think it came out 2000 and then Jennifer's Body was like 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that there's a lot of movies that sort of
kind of like anticipate it.
Yeah, I think so. You know, things like Carrie and like stuff like that, which I'm sure we'll talk about like eventually. But I think that Ginger Snaps was probably like one of the first movies that was sort of like made with like the intent of like girls like watch. Yes. It was made with girls in mind, I feel like, and it was sort of that sort of the idea of like the monstrous sort of like teenage girl,
like monstrous femininity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we're gonna go through a plot summary. So, Ginger and Bridget are sisters who are fascinated by the morbid. They have agreed that by the age of 16, they will have either moved out of the suburbs or died. In the process of trying to kidnap their bully's dog, Ginger, who has just started her period, is bitten by a werewolf. After being attacked, Ginger turns monstrous. She is beating up her bully, killing dogs, and most importantly, having unprotected sex.
Oh my god.
Bridget and local drug dealer / creep Sam decide this is lycanthropy, just like Shakira did. Yeah. In her song, She-Wolf.
The She-Wolf in the Closet.
I love that song.
There really is one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trina is killed by Ginger in a spat over her dog, and in the process of storing her body, 2 of her fingers get
lopped off. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Jason, who is now also exhibiting monstrous symptoms after having sex with Ginger, attacks Bridget. She defends herself with the cure she's been working on with Sam. Now they know it works. Meanwhile, Ginger is going on a killing rampage. The mom finds Trina's body and, while driving Bridget to the greenhouse bash, offers to protect them. This is a really interesting moment. Yeah. And then Bridget runs out to go find Sam, and then finds Ginger hurting Sam at the bash. She convinces her that she's on her side just in time for Sam to knock her out. And then they both go to the house and have Ginger in the back of the truck.
Yeah, that's where everything goes down.
Yeah, to go work on the cure. And then finally, Ginger's able to get away from them. Right as they arrive home, she's like, "Bonk, I'm out." And then Sam and Bridget are able to make more of the cure, but Sam is attacked again. Bridget tries to convince Ginger that she's on her side by drinking Sam's blood. Ginger isn't convinced and kills him.
Yes.
And then Bridget, knife in one hand, cure in the other, is trying to defend herself when Ginger jumps into the knife, basically impales herself.
Yes.
Ginger dies, and Bridget holds her sister crying. End of movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of the main actors, the main figures in making this movie: Emily Perkins is Bridget. Catherine Isabel. Yay! We love her. Catherine Isabel as Ginger. And when I was younger and I watched this movie, I had the biggest crush on her. And then when I watched Hannibal, I had the biggest crush on her.
Yeah, no. She's so she's so perfect.
And then all the other people: Chris Lemche as Sam, Mimi Rogers as Pamela, who She does an awesome job.
Yeah.
I love her. Jesse Moss as Jason, who also plays his role really convincingly.
Yes.
Danielle Hampton as Trina. And those are kind of like the main figures.
Mm-hmm.
Directed by John Fawcett. Screenplay by Karen Walton. And then they co-wrote the story.
Yes. And I always, every time I watch this movie, I always forget that it's technically a Canadian movie.
Yeah.
And so I'm always watching it and it's like totally normal to me. And then there's like that one scene where like the van pulls up and it just says like Ontario on the license plate. And I'm like, oh, this is Canada? Like I always forget like every single time.
Yes,
So.
literally. And it's so interesting because I feel like the place movies usually, big blockbuster movies or like big influential movies usually come out of the US.
Yeah.
Which, you know, like mass generalization, obviously not every movie, but it's so interesting to me that I don't think that this movie could have been made in the US.
You don't?
I think it could have been made like practically, but I think the culture of the US.
Yeah.
I think that it's so interesting that this like pivotal kind of like seminal film in feminist horror is Canadian because I feel like they were like quicker to talk about the issues.
That's true. And then before I'm gonna scoot over.
Yeah.
Before we started the podcast, before we hit record, we were talking about, me and Jenny were actually talking about how much more toned down this movie is, like when it comes to like the color palette, just, you know, and things like that, and how muted it is in nature. And so I think that's really, I feel like that is much more of a trademark of like the Canadian aspect of this film, whereas I think we were talking about how Jennifer's body was like a lot like more colorful.
Up, it's colorful.
It's very
it's
like
more
poppy.
comedic.
Yeah.
I think that if Jennifer's body is the horror comedy, this is the horror tragedy.
True. Yeah.
Like this is like this is where like you're supposed to deeply feel like how tragic the circumstances of the situation are.
Yeah.
So let's get into Act 1.
Okay, yes.
So just so we make it clear, we're breaking it down so that beginning of Act 1 is beginning of the film, obviously. And then we're breaking it off at Ginger's hallway walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I felt like that was like a nice natural
like a nice turn.
Yeah. She at that point she's been bitten, like all the characters have been introduced, like the setup is like done, and she is werewolf.
Yes. Yeah.
Weregirl.
Yeah.
But the town, Bailey Downs.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that the movie starts off with a dog dying, that mom finding the dog, and then I feel like the movie really sets itself as a horror comedy because the mom is sort of like screaming and crying in the cul-de-sac, and then like everyone just like kind of like looks at her and she's like, they got the dog, and then everyone just sort of like goes back to like what they're doing, you know,
giggling, field hockey, all of that stuff.
And then Bridget, you know, she sees the whole thing go down, and then she goes back into like her bedroom with Ginger there, and Ginger's sort of like romanticizing like what her suicide's gonna be, and Bridget says something to the effect of like the beast, whatever it is that's killing these dogs in the neighborhood, it got, you know, that one dog, and she said something to the effect of you know, how hard can it be to catch it if this place is full of dead ends, which I feel like was really reflected like the area that they're sort of like living in, and just sort of like how trapped they feel in that this sort of like suburban kind of like hellscape. So
I think it's also so interesting that like I don't think that they're ever as stylized as they are in this first scene. I don't think their like dialogue is ever as, you know, like over the top, or that their characters are played as over the top. You know, they only get more dimensional and sincere, but this first scene really sets them up as like they're the weird sisters. You know? And I think that that's so fascinating. And what I also like about this opening scene is that you see this tragedy happen. You see people brush off this tragedy like, oh, another dog died, whatever. And then you see Bridget saying to Ginger, how are we going to be any different? Like if something happens to us, like people like are like, I just can't imagine them looking at my body. I can't imagine them like not caring. And then Ginger, of course, she's like, no, our suicide is going to be like awesome and so cool. We also want to warn lots of themes about romanticizing suicide
yeah.
and death
Yeah.
and harm.
Yeah.
And I think that a big point of this film is like trying to get to the point that suicide and death are not as romantic and alluring as they might see. Because, you know, the beginning where they're like, let us do all these scenes, let us take all these pictures, let us do all this stuff.
Yeah.
Really contrasts
Yeah.
the reality.
Well, that title sequence I think is so interesting because it's showing sort of like all of these pictures of them.
Yeah.
And like they're sort of like photography project
Yeah.
where they're in like all these different like really highly stylized sort of like kind of like campy sort of like death scenarios, you know?
All revolving around, you know, femininity and their suburb.
Right. Yeah. There's like
there's like pictures with the skirt that's like a little pulled up and like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that title sequence was really creative in that it was setting up the movie so that you're sort of, I feel like the movie is almost a it's observing itself in a way, and I feel like just like Jennifer's Body, it's sort of it's observing itself in the genre of horror, and it's sort of like a commentary on the horror genre, and the sort of like romanticization or romanticizing death, and sort of like how we sort of view death in like media and like storytelling.
Yeah.
So
and how it's seen as like alluring, like almost sexy.
Yes.
Like almost like death and horror in a lot of ways like sexualize death. And it's really interesting because you see the girls doing it. Well, specifically Ginger, you see her like sexualizing and romanticizing her death very intensely.
Yes.
And then, you know, the reality of it is that when it comes, it's not sexual or romantic.
No, and I think that also that beginning scene sort of sets up the rest of the movie because we see, you know, Ginger is sort of like very, very much into this idea of the whole, you know, out by 16, dead on the scene, together forever.
Yeah.
And Bridget's a little bit more hesitant. I feel like that sort of shows how immature Ginger is and how she's sort of committed to this like bit that they have that they're like these weird sisters and like they're gonna kill themselves. And I think Bridget is a little bit more mature in that way, even though Bridget's younger and Ginger's older.
Yeah. And I do think it's fascinating that she brings up like, hey, you brought this up first. Then Bridget says, when I was 8. Can you imagine 2 8-year-olds being like,
we're gonna kill ourselves.
We're gonna kill ourselves. Like,
literally.
8. Like, I don't know how true that is, but I think that the fact that it was included really serves like it just like serves kind of like the stylization of it. Yeah. Because, you know, realistically, an 8-year-old is not going to be like, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah. And I think that it also shows how, I mean, throughout this entire movie, you know, Bridget's sort of tied to Ginger. And I think that's sort of like one of the themes of the movie is like these sort of unhealthy, like sisterly bonds or just unhealthy like female bonds. Yeah. When you're sort of like under the thumb of like another girl, and she's sort of like, you know, is like a little bit of a narcissist, and she's sort of like she doesn't really have your best interest in mind. Yeah, it's just like the Jennifer's Body episode. It is, yeah. And it's I found this interesting article. I feel like now would be a good time to bring it up. Yeah. Where, you know, like, I think that the queerness in this film comes from, you know, like the sisters, but I think that it's kind of like the morality code, you know, like where they had to like in Hollywood, like years ago, they would make a film, and then at the end they would like fix it morally so that it would be allowed to be released. Yeah. So like with Mae West movies, it would be like this like slutty slut is doing slut things and attracting men. But then at the end, don't worry, she settles down and she gets married and she like does all this. You have to sort of like, you can have it, but you have to correct it. Yes, exactly. You have to make sure that at the end, you know, like morality or like traditionalism prevails. Yeah. And I feel like they couldn't have had this film with two friends, especially in the year 2000. Right. And this article, who is it? By Noah Berlatsky. Noah Berlatsky wrote this in 2020. It's called Sister Lovers, The Curse of Queerness in Ginger Snaps. And it kind of points out how, you know, like you're suspending your disbelief when you look at them and say, yeah, they're sisters. Uh-huh. Because they don't look anything alike. Yeah.
like, it really is a strong suspension. They're the same age, roughly.
Yeah.
They don't look alike. They're very close.
Yeah.
They're very close.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, queerness. So
I think also there was that one part that I thought was really interesting in terms of the article where,
yeah.
I mean, I guess we'll get into it, but I mean, just starting off, like, there's that one scene where where Ginger does say to Bridget, you know, like, it's almost like we're not even related.
Yeah.
And so I always thought that part was, like, really, really weird. And I thought that, you know, like, kind of the like, incestuous undertones were always very bothersome to me.
Yeah.
But it's also, I could see definitely how, you know, they couldn't have that sort of, like, I don't think they could have written this about friends.
Yes.
For sure.
Exactly.
And so I think that sort of, like, definitely makes it more icky and kind of shows how much Ginger has changed and how this sort of thing has taken over her.
Yeah.
But I think it also sort of is, you know, the movie itself sort of being like, this could have been queer. You know what I mean? So yeah.
And I think it's what inspires Jennifer's Body later to just like go for it.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the fact that like 9 years later they're just able to make it about friends and like that just is what it is like, I think that this movie built the highway that Jennifer's Body is driving on.
Right.
You know? So there's one part in particular. And the thing that is most obviously fake is not the blood and gore, but the pretense that the Fitzgerald sisters are sisters. And then later on in the article, in this context, Ginger's transformation isn't just a metaphor for female adolescence, it's a metaphor for queer adolescence. She becomes more femme, she also becomes more masculine. And then when she when she rapes Jason,
right,
that is what I would call it.
Yeah, I definitely got those undertones, and even the mauling kind of had that same undertone. So yeah.
She asks him, "Who's the guy?" Because he says, "Well, who's the guy here?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Who's the guy? Well, fuck you."
Yeah.
And like that's kind of like a signifier. Like, okay, she's hot, she's femme, but she's also like aggro. She's also hyper masculine.
Dominant, yeah.
Yeah. And it also says most of the movie is devoted to Bridget and Ginger's efforts to keep Ginger's condition closeted so she can pass. I thought that was also a really interesting thought. Like the mom being an allegory for a mom who learns that her kid is queer.
Yeah.
Like, don't worry, I'll burn all this shit down.
Yeah.
Like your dad, forget about him.
Yeah, forget about him.
Yeah. But then at the end, Bridget kind of rejects, if it's an allegory for queerness, Bridget rejects it. Because she says, I'm not dying in this room with you. She is like, no more. And it says, Bridget says no and kills her rather than be consumed by queer desire. Which I thought is really interesting.
Yeah.
Like, really fascinating reading.
Yeah, and I think, too, and I think one of the reasons why werewolves are I would say my favorite monster, and I think that especially female werewolves are my favorite monster, is because traditionally, as monstrous as women are portrayed in movies and literature, I think that it's definitely a sort of controlled monstrosity.
Yeah.
And I think that there's definitely more acceptable, like socially acceptable ways for women to be monstrous. And a lot of times when we're talking about animals and transformation, we see women turn into things that are very like sleek and sexual. So things like cats, most often I would say things like snakes, birds. These things are sort of like, you know, they're animals and they're sort of scary and they're sort of witchy, but they're at the end of the day, they're very like non-harmful. They're very like sleek and very sexy.
Very elegant.
Very elegant, yeah. And I think that one of the things that I really love about ginger snaps, and I think that the reason why I think a lot of like lesbians and like queer women really gravitate towards ginger snaps and like female werewolves is because the female werewolf essentially like disregards that rule, and you know, you sort of turn into something aggressive and you turn into something like very hairy and something extremely dangerous, and sort of, you know, I think wolves just in themselves are these sort of like symbols of like the wild. They're sort of opposing society and like, you know, just So I think that that's probably one of the ways that Ginger Snaps sort of just inherently portrays queerness is because
Yeah.
Ginger is essentially turning into something that is so far outside of society.
Yeah, it's like a complete rejection of the male gaze.
It is, yeah.
Whereas like maybe like a sexy snake, like
Yeah.
oh my god, look at it, it's like slithering around, like
Right,
something like
yeah.
that. It's like there's still like this instinctual like okay, like when this happens, you can tell a man is behind it.
Right, yeah.
You know, you can tell that there's still like this desire to produce this like elegant kind of like palatable result, right?
Yeah.
And then with Ginger Snaps, it's like, no, she's hairy.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
like she's like growing hair everywhere.
Yeah.
She like gets a snout, she gets
Right.
a tail. She gets like things that are not at all sexy or appealing.
Right. But it's so interesting because she's still allowed to be sexy
Yeah.
and you know and sort of like portray like female sexuality.
Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting because throughout the whole movie it's just sort of you're seeing it's not like she turns in like one go. It's like
Yeah.
it's sort of this steady transformation and it's sort of like, you know, at what point does she stop being sexy? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's sort of like
Yeah.
I think it's so interesting how they
Yeah.
did that and like that really slow burn sort of turning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is really interesting. So, okay, let me think of more things in Act 1 to bring up. I think that Trina is a fascinating character,
Yeah.
and I mourn her death.
Yeah.
I actually
Yeah.
really do.
Yeah.
Because I believe her when she says the stuff she says about Sam.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with like, she's portrayed like mean girl, bitch, bully.
Yeah.
But when she goes to the house to get her dog,
Uh-huh.
she is visibly upset, but she's also in a way very rational.
Yeah.
She's warning Bridget. She's giving her like a fair warning, I feel like.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people would read that coded with like jealousy, coded with, you know, I don't know, some mean girl something. And you know, Trina is a mean girl. I'm not going to deny that.
Yeah.
But I think that the Trina that goes to get her dog back is one who is in mourning and one who has realized something about the relationship she might have had with this guy, and one who goes, you know, in earnest to, one, get her companion back, to get her dog back because she cares about it, but two, to warn this girl that she doesn't like about this shitty guy who's, what was the phrase, like cherry picker?
Yeah, he only likes virgins.
Yeah. And Sam says continually throughout the film, I don't like you, Bridget. I don't like you in that way.
Yeah.
I don't fucking buy it, dude.
Yeah.
I do not fucking buy it. And I think he's slimy. And I think that for all the good he does in this movie, he likes little girls. Like, you cannot deny it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that throughout the whole movie, Ginger sort of like, she doesn't like him. And
Yeah.
she kind of, I think it's interesting that Ginger sort of like perceives, another part of Ginger that I've personally have always read as very queer is that Ginger doesn't like, there's certain men around Bridget that Ginger doesn't like. She perceives them all as like threats.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I think sometimes irrationally, like she doesn't really like the janitor. And I think she ends up killing the janitor. And then, but she also really doesn't like Sam. And so you're watching and you're like, oh, like that doesn't make any sense. It seems like Sam like wants to help, but you can't help but sort of wonder, like, what does Ginger see in these men that like we're not maybe seeing? So
Yeah.
I think to me, that's always felt very queer.
Yeah. And there is kind of like this like animal instinct to like protect your pack.
Right. Yeah.
Or whatever the phrasing would be. And I feel like she has that to an extreme extent, but I do feel like she's honed in on something that maybe we're not. And I think maybe she's overly honed in with the janitor. I think that the janitor is just maybe a kind man.
Yeah.
But I do not trust Sam.
No. Yeah.
And I think that Trina's death, like, given those circumstances, given all the context, is really tragic to me. Let's talk about the mom for a minute. You know?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Like, I think that moms, in general, Moms and Girls, there's so much content there to mine.
I know, and
Girls and their moms.
I love how, because I feel like I loved how the movie sort of disregarded a lot of. I feel like the men in the movie were sort of like subpar. I feel like they were not like, like as a failure, but I think intentionally subpar.
Yeah.
And they were sort of just like disregarded, and I think the dad was sort of like, just this sort of bumbling idiot. But I think that the movie placed a lot of emphasis on like female relationships, and I feel like one of those relationships that they sort of addressed was definitely like the tension between like moms and their daughters.
Yeah, and there's tension, but there's also so much love there.
Right.
From the mom's part.
Yeah.
From Pamela's part.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or as Ginger would call her, Pam.
Right, and I think the movie sort of sets it up where you're watching it and you're kind of like, oh yeah, like she's just like a typical like annoying mom with like really cringe questions about like periods and like stuff like that, and she's just your typical like Canadian mom, I feel like.
Yeah, but also she's a very healthy, well-adjusted, normal person who's going to counseling with her seemingly like I don't know, aloof husband.
Yeah, sort of just like apathetic husband.
That's the perfect word for it. Yeah. And he has no clue about their lives, the girls' lives, and she wants to know. And she's just a healthy parent. And I think that they framed this healthy parent in a really like comedic way. She is in a way the comedic relief. But also she is so like tragically loving. To the point where like she excuses her daughter's actions. Yeah. And she's like, oh, they're just growing. Oh, they're just exploring. Yeah. Oh, they're just this. Oh, they're just that. And it's like, well, are they? Yeah. But I think that for as far as movie moms go, maybe one of the healthiest I've ever seen. Yeah. A little helicoptery. A little much. Yeah. But trying.
Yeah, and it makes it really makes you wonder like how Ginger and Bridget turned out the way that they did, with like such like a loving and like caring and sort of helicoptery kind of mom. Yeah. Because they're they're very like dark and they're very moody and they sort of have this like really tragic outlook on life. Yeah. And she's just sort of, but she's nothing but caring towards them. So.
And she's kind of like a craft mom.
She is.
And she's always wearing the best things.
I know.
She's wearing like the sweaters. She's wearing like. She's always wearing the most like grandma core mom stuff.
Yeah, she's very like colorful and she gardens. Like I love that about her.
Yeah, and she's just like creating. She's kind of in a way the opposite of them, where they're like, let me destroy everything. And she's just like, she's cooking, she's cleaning, she's like gardening, she's doing all these like typical. And I almost feel like their rejection of all that is a response to their mom. It's like a response to like, I don't want this normalcy. I don't want this like femininity. I don't want all this stuff. Yeah. I don't want cookies and milk. You know?
Yeah, I think, and I like how that's sort of like resolved at the end. I really like how that sort of like gets turned where you're kind of like watching and you're kind of like you're viewing it from Bridget and Ginger's perspective and you're like, oh my gosh, like I remember like my mom being that way, and like that's so annoying. And then at the end it does sort of get resolved and it does sort of like turn a little bit. So I think that's really interesting that they set that up and they put so much emphasis on the mom.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that because I feel like that is the reality of like many like family dynamics, is that the mother and the daughter have a strong bond. Yeah. And I do think that Ginger kind of defers to her dad, but I think that she defers to her dad because it's easy. Yeah, exactly. I think that her dad doesn't challenge her. I think that her dad goes along with everything she says. And I think that her dad is ultimately uninterested in her well-being.
Yeah. I think the only time we really understand the dad is when, we're around the kitchen table and then the mom starts, she gets really excited because Ginger's like clearly like on her period. Yeah. And she's, trying to she's trying to have this interaction with her where she's like, oh my gosh, like, you're a like young woman and stuff like that. And then the dad's just kind of like, hey, we're eating here, like,
we're eating here. Yeah. Period's gross.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the only.
And Ginger kind of reflects that. Yeah. She's like, yeah, mom, that's nasty. Ew, I don't want to be normal. Yeah. And, actually, now that we're getting into it, I think that their problems stem from their dad.
Probably, yeah. And I think there's like that really like popular quote that's been going around on TikTok about, you know, like how when you're a daughter and, you know, like you have a dad, like you and your dad will sort of like exchange looks about your mom and sort of use your mom's always the butt of all of your guys' like inside jokes.
Yeah.
But then, like that's going to be you one day.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's so appropriate for this whole movie because I feel like one of the themes of the movie is that like this sort of foreshadowing, or this, you know, like the horrors of femininity and womanhood being sort of this like, you know, omen and this sort of like unavoidable fate that you have. And it's just sort of like, it's viewed very like tragically.
Yeah.
And I think that the mom in this being the butt of the joke that between Ginger and like her dad, I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
This might be a good time to get into the second act.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right after hallway walk.
Oh wait, we need to talk about when Ginger actually gets attacked.
Oh yeah. Okay. That is true. Okay. We're jumping around a little.
The mauling, who cares? But that hallway walk.
Yeah.
Iconic.
Literally. Yeah. But okay. First of all,
yeah.
The way they portrayed a period. Girl, that's not what your first period would be.
Is that not?
Oh, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. But in my experience, like, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Everyone's period is like vastly different. But I just thought it was funny that like first moment of first period gusher.
Yeah, it's like Cannibal Corpse level, like a geyser. Yeah. Like I think Bridget even describes it that way. It's like a geyser of blood.
Yeah, and maybe that was on purpose.
I definitely think it was on purpose to just show like how, I think maybe like a natural, that sort of like how scary it is. I think like your first time, like how alarming it is, and like how you know, it does to them it does seem like a curse.
Yeah.
And it sort of gets, I think, really blended in with the lycanthropy.
You know, so the 28-day cycle.
Yeah, and you're like, how much of this is like actually just their being a teenage girl, and how much of this is like being a werewolf. So.
Yeah. And I do think it's so interesting that like Bridget uses the period calendar that she gets with the pads or tampons or whatever as a calendar to be like, when is
the next
she
full moon?
Yeah. So that is also fascinating, and that is also I like how intertwined they are, and you know, I think that they are both like naturalistic things.
Yeah.
Like the full moon, like a person's cycle, like they're supposed to be like highly naturalistic, but also very like frightening.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Sam happens to hit the werewolf.
Yeah.
With the car.
Yes.
And he's a weirdo. He's
weirdo.
Like, that's a werewolf.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting too, the sort of like, you know, Ginger gets attacked by this werewolf, and then they go back to her house and her parents are gone. And I think it's always like really interesting, like how the parents are sort of like, when they're gone, that's always like when something really bad happens. But they go back to the house, and then Ginger is sort of like in shock, and I really like how they show like how in shock she is. And then Bridget, like, you know, I think that she is there for Ginger in a way that Ginger isn't there for Bridget a lot of times, preceding the mauling. But I think that it still shows, like, because, you know, they sort of romanticize death and gore a lot of the times, but then like when they're sort of like faced with it, they don't, they're just children, and you can kind of see that like it's highly different from like their photo project. Yeah.
They're 16 and 15 at the end of the day. And they're not going to understand the implications of, you know, romanticizing death.
Exactly.
And then you're right, when they're faced with it, it's like
they're
it's
in
another
shock.
world.
Ginger or Bridget doesn't really know what to do. She's like, you know, like, let's go to the hospital, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, Ginger is just sort of like freaking out and stuff. But I think it's really interesting that they sort of show that like the wound is like already healing, and then like Ginger decides to like not go to the hospital. You know, she kind of stays. And to me, I think that like that really read to me like a rape scene, because, you know, you sort of like have
Yeah.
the aftershock of it, and then like the deliberation, like, do I go to the hospital? Do I not go to the hospital? And then sort of,
Yeah.
yeah. And it just the fact that like it was in the woods, like around like, you know, like a suburban area, just sort of
Yeah.
like it had that. I think that the werewolf maulings have always had that sort of connotation.
Yeah.
And so to me that really like played through.
Yeah. I had never thought of it that way.
Yeah.
But you're so right.
Yeah.
And then to have them like comfort each other
Right.
the
Yeah.
whole rest of the night.
Yeah.
And, you know, like two sisters comfort each other after something traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just nothing to be done,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, how do you go back to normal like after that? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there's,
Yeah.
and then Ginger's sort of like dead like the next day at school. She's like
Yeah.
sort of like really, really not okay. And you can
Yeah.
sort of see her like health kind of degrade like after that.
Yeah.
And until we get to the hallway walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's shivering. She's
Mhm.
kind of like,
Pale,
she's
gaunt.
pale.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's got all of these like markers of like, I'm sick, I am unwell.
Yeah.
But that could also be markers of a period.
Right. Yes.
That
Exactly.
they're markers of something traumatic in this case,
Mhm.
but also like, that's how I feel during my period.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
You know?
Where she's like hunched over in the aisle. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
very much like period vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else do we have here? I think that the argument that they have
Mm-hmm.
toward the end of Act 1,
Mm-hmm.
right before the hallway walk, I think that is such a good indicator of how brutal girl arguments can be.
Yeah.
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 Because I think, like, it reminds me of the end of Jennifer's Body.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that men tend to not be very astute and tend not to be able to read people's emotions or people's feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that women are conditioned to do
Mhm.
that. You're conditioned to be aware of how people are feeling.
Yeah.
You're conditioned to be responsible for how people are feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that within that, you kind of learn, you know, what people are upset about, what people, you know, what their insecurities are.
Mm-hmm.
And then moments like this, like the argument that they have right at the end of Act 1, you just hurl it at each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that that's really, like, really indicative of, like, how, you know, I think that girl arguments are more intense because I feel like girls, when they are in friendship, they know each other more
Yeah.
intimately
Yeah.
than when men are in friendship.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think that lots of statistics about, like, men having very few friends
Mhm.
and men not being well connected and men not being able to, like, read emotions as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that kind of plays into, like, this kind of, like, almost like in Jennifer's Body, it's supernatural, but here it's
Yeah.
very visceral.
Yeah.
And it just, like, comes out more strongly in sisterhood.
Yeah, and I think that like a lot of the times those sort of like you see these moments of like resentment between them. I feel like these like little
Yeah.
bickering kind of moments, and then when it gets to like these fights, it is laid all out, and it's
Yeah.
just like so like it like you can feel it because like if you've ever had like female friendships or like sisters, like
Yeah.
you've been there before, and
Yeah.
I think that they did such a good job of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Okay. Hallway scene.
Yes, the hallway scene.
What to say about the hallway scene? She takes a moment at the beginning
Mm-hmm.
where she's like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
How do I approach this?
Mm.
She's wearing, because throughout the film, she and Bridget have been in very loose clothing,
Mm-hmm.
very, like, I wouldn't say unflattering, but very, like, casual clothing, very, like, comfy.
Yeah, a sort of what is that word, like amorphic, I suppose. Like
amorphous.
amorphous, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's very obscuring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very obscuring, and I think that this is her moment where she's like, okay, like, I think that in her mind it's like, I'm gonna trap a guy,
Yeah.
and what do I have to do that? Titties out.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
like tight shirt, tight skirt,
Mm-hmm.
and just like walk down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is so fascinating because up until that moment, she's maybe shown a little interest.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's been discussed. Discussed at the idea
At least disguised as discussed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, at the idea of being with, attracting, like all of that to do.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a switch flips here.
Yeah.
And suddenly all the guys are like, whoa, what the?
Yeah.
Girl boobs?
Yeah. Yeah. And you could sort of see, to me, it's always read as, Ginger, she's become like a hunter.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. You can sort of like see that sort of like that predator kind of walk like in her.
Yeah.
And I think that was like such an iconic moment, because I feel like that really, I don't think it like necessarily defines the whole like monstrous girl like genre, but I feel like it really showcased it in a lot of ways. And I think that that's why Jennifer's Body did the same exact thing later on.
Yeah, I think that with this kind of like monstrous femininity genre, it's all about like attacking. It's all about attacking first. It's about like, I'm the aggressor now. Like, who's the guy?
Yeah.
Like, I'm, like, you're my victim now.
Yeah.
And I think that in this moment, she really has, like, she has to take a step and she has to be like, how do I do this? Right? And then she's like, oh, wait, I know how.
Yeah.
And then she gets them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that that is so fascinating. And I think that also there's an aspect of it where she's mad at Bridget. She's upset with Bridget. She wants to make Bridget jealous. Here's that queer aspect coming in again.
Yeah.
She wants to make Bridget jealous.
Right.
And you could say like, oh, it's because they spend so much time together as sisters. And that is like the literal reading, right?
Yeah.
But like, there's something else there.
Yes.
And I do think that in other sister relationships, maybe the jealousy would not exist in the same way.
Yeah.
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 It would still, I think, exist, but maybe just not quite in the same way.
Yeah, they're definitely, like, I feel like as sisters, just like narratively, like, they're very odd that way. And you sort of are kind of like left like being like, okay, like they're weird for obvious reasons, and then they're also weird for other reasons.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that also the walk scene is definitely it's a turning point in the movie, but it also sort of makes you like, you can sort of see that like, Ginger's changing and she's going to change physically, but you are sort of, it's very obvious that like internally Ginger is changing. And I think it's interesting that she changes internally before she changes like externally.
There's an attitude shift.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that before she even gets into like the physical changes, she gets into the mindset.
Yeah.
And I think that that's crucial because there is more like push and pull with her than there is with Jennifer, where Jennifer, it's just like a brazen like acceptance of like, yeah, I'm this monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you mean? Yeah, I'm this monster.
Yeah.
And with Ginger, it's a little more subdued. There's a little more push and pull. But at the end of the day, she enjoys the power.
Yeah.
She loves the social capital, you know? And I think that at the end of the day, Ginger has the same insecurities that Jennifer has. And the same, like, she's influenced by her social surroundings.
Yeah.
And I think that Bridget is a lot more internal, which kind of contrasts her with, like, needy.
Yeah, and I think that in a lot of ways too, it sort of like shows how maybe trapped Ginger feels. I think that I mean, they obviously both are very vocal about how trapped they feel, sort of like in the life that they're living, in the place that they're living.
Yeah.
But I think that in a lot of ways, Ginger sort of like wanting to be free, of being sort of like the the loser weird girl kind of role. I think is maybe also like, I think she's taking this sort of like sexy avenue, or this like sort of werewolf avenue, sort of trying to, in a way that she's trying to escape.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that after she gets home, after basically, raping Jason, and she says, something is really wrong with me. And then she's like, I thought I was horny, but I'm not. And she thought it was, this like very visceral desire for sex.
Yeah.
Like a very like aggressive, intense desire for sex. And it's just desire for aggression.
To tear everything to fucking pieces.
Yeah. That is fascinating to me.
Yeah. I think that to me that's such an iconic moment because I feel like it resonated with like a lot of girls because and I mean it definitely resonated with me just because I think that like even though you can have like these these desires and you can sort of like play into them, I feel like there's also something about being a girl that is so that feels so inherently trapping. And I feel like it builds up like a lot of resentment, and I think that you sort of have these feelings of like you don't want to do this anymore. You don't want to be the like loser anymore. You don't want to be the weird girl anymore. You don't want to be and maybe I'm projecting too much. Like you don't want to be like the weird girl anymore. But you also don't want to be. You don't want having this being sexy being like the only way out of that.
Yeah.
You just like want to destroy all of that. You want to destroy everything, and you just want to be like your natural like primal self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really agree with that because it's like there is a certain shift like if you grew up as someone who's not seen as traditionally beautiful or desirable.
Yeah.
And then you kind of like you get like a glow up or like
Right.
you get out of your ugly duckling phase or
Right.
anything like that. And then suddenly you're seen as desirable. It can be really, really shocking. It can be really jarring. And at first it can feel positive, but ultimately it's traumatic, I think.
I think so too.
Because I think that going from like being this person who like isn't seen as desirable, isn't seen as like particularly like hot, and then going from that to someone who is seen as desirable and hot, it I think opens you up to experiences that are far more, I think, upsetting.
Yeah, and I think that, in a lot of ways it sort of at first you have no attention on you, or at least you have like a negative attention on you, and then to all of a sudden have a lot of attention on you and a lot of like what you would perceive as positive attention on you just based on like how you look. That's so like upsetting, and so that makes me like, or I think it'd make anybody like really, really angry. Like you only want me because I am this way, and like you only want me in this way. And I think that like sexuality and like like the hormonal stages of puberty, I think those are very primal things. And I think that that's sort of like offset, or at least like it sort of runs parallel but sort of like is juxtaposed, I think, to her sort of like violent feelings. So she's sort of feeling these really sexual feelings, but she's also feeling extremely violent, and they sort of like they're like contrasting, but they're sort of entwined at the same time.
Yeah, they're contrasting, but they are like linked.
Yeah.
And they kind of collide in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that afterwards, she is worried about the social repercussions of it. And she says, he got laid and I'm just a lay.
Yeah.
Because she knows that even if in that moment, she was aggressive and she's like, I'm the guy, and even if in that moment she had power, she understands the social structures and the social hierarchy, where even if she felt powerful, even if she felt like that is something that she wanted to do, at the end of the day, socially, he got laid and I'm just a lay.
Yeah.
And I think that's so fascinating, especially in a high school setting.
Yes.
I feel like that's very true.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably also a commentary on sort of like, I think this was made in like the year 2000. I think that was probably sort of a reaction to sort of like the sexual liberation that was like throughout like the 70s and like stuff like that, where, I think that like in a lot of ways, hypersexuality was sort of framed as a way out for like a lot of women, and it was sort of framed as like its own sort of avenue of feminism, but in a lot of ways it's you can take that avenue in a lot of ways. You can like be sexualized and like stuff like that, but at the end of the day that patriarchal structure is still there.
Yeah. And it's gonna find a way, even if you feel positive,
Yeah.
to make you feel negative.
Yeah.
And it's going to be something where even if in your moments of like joy and empowerment, you still exist within this structure. You can never escape it. And I think that is also like a source of her aggression.
Right. And it's again that feeling of being trapped.
Yeah.
There's that constant feeling of being trapped in this throughout this whole movie.
Yeah.
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 And it all, I don't know, something about the color, something about the way spacing is done. It feels small.
Yeah.
The film kind of feels small.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly how to phrase that.
Well, they're always in a room.
Yeah.
If you like notice, like they're always like they're always sort of like having these like really intense conversations and moments in this one room, and then you sort of also see, you know, like I think towards like the end of the film, we'll get into it, but they're, you know, she's sort of like crawling around sort of like in the bare bones of the house and these sort of narrow hallways and stuff like that. And sort of Bridget's sort of like in between the bed and the wall, and it's just it's so claustrophobic feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is actually such a good point. I think that it's interesting. After Jason gets raped, he goes to his friends, all injured. They're like, "Bro, what's up? What happened? like did you get laid or something?" He says, "Ginger rocked my world."
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Mm.
In the moments before, he's saying, before it happened, he's saying, "No, slow down, stop."
Yep.
But he has to put up this front.
Right.
And that's when people, when they're talking about toxic masculinity hurts men, this is what they're talking about.
Yeah.
He's visibly injured. He's visibly shaken up. And his friends are like, "Hey, what's up? What happened?" And he can't say, like, "This girl messed with me.
Yeah,
this girl
was like
hurt
terrifying.
me. This was scary.
Yeah.
This was like, I'm injured."
Yeah.
He has to say, it was good.
Yeah.
It was aggressive.
Right.
She rocked my world. He can't be honest with them.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really sad aspect of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also I made a note in my notes that I think it's interesting how the lycanthropy was very like natural for Ginger. It sort of like made her stronger. I think it made her weaker at first, but then it made her like really, really strong. And it sort of brought out like her like natural sort of like femininity, I suppose, like the natural aspects of her femininity. And I think in a lot of ways for Jason, the lycanthropy was very debilitating.
Yeah.
And he sort of started experiencing the turning in the ways that women experience puberty. So like when he's
got the
peeing
pimples,
blood and stuff like that, the blood spot in his pants and like things like that.
Which makes me wonder, is in this film lycanthropy, is it like inherently feminine because it's tied to the cycle, like the menstruation cycle? Is that what they're saying, that like this like thing that makes you powerful, this thing that makes you, you know, scary, is inherently feminine? Yeah, and that's how I felt. I felt like it was saying, like, you are not compatible for this.
Right.
You're able to have the aggression, but not the power.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Like, you've got, like, this instinct, you've got, like, this, like, desire, but you don't have any of, like, the accompanying, like, grace to it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Which is, like, almost funny to say, but it's, like, it's true. He had no, like, he had no grace. He couldn't carry it.
Right. And
Yeah.
he
You're
didn't
right, it was
have,
debilitating for him.
yeah, and he didn't have like the sort of like super strong like alpha vibes that Ginger had. I think that, you know, because Ginger's like ripping people apart and ripping dogs apart.
Yeah.
And then I think like the worst that we see him do is that he does corner Bridget in the closet, but he also sort of like he's trying to get the candy from the kids or whatever. He's like grabbing the kid, and you're just sort of like, what a loser. You know?
And this kid is just kind of like, leave me alone.
Yeah,
And just like leaves.
Yeah.
Gets out of there.
Yeah. So I think that's really interesting that the lycanthropy affected them like so differently. And then also I think that it's interesting how that sort of sexual aggression is like passed down, because you know, Ginger experienced it in the woods, and then she sort of does the same thing to him, and then he tries to do the same thing to Bridget.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how I feel like this movie I think also has like a lot of undertones of sexual trauma and like how sexual trauma affects people. And I think that definitely that's what that scene that's how that scene read to me. Yeah.
Also, once you told me when you just said and like cornered Bridget in the closet, Bridget is in the closet throughout this movie. She's
Yeah,
like
always
literally
in
in
the
closets
closet.
all the time, which is so funny to me now that we've brought up like the queer reading. It's
Yeah.
like, wait, actually, like this girl is always in closets. Like,
Yeah.
what is going on here?
Yeah.
That's hilarious to me. Yeah, I can't remember what prompted this, but Ginger has a moment where she's trying to cut her tail off. She's like tired of it.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
And she's also, it kind of contrasts the beginning. Because the beginning, she's playing with the idea of hurting herself.
Yeah.
And she's romanticizing it.
Yeah.
In this moment, she's sitting on the toilet trying to cut her tail off. She's actually doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that is really upsetting to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I do remember what prompted it. I think what the mom there's a moment where she's sort of in the bathroom and then she like kicks the wall. She's sitting on the edge of the tub and she kicks the wall and then she sort of sees the little like the little claw sort of like coming out of her ankle. And I think that might have prompted it because I think Bridget came back from probably being with Sam and then saw her in the bathroom, I think.
Yeah, I think this is the point where it gets to be too much for her. Where, like, you were asking, like, at one point, is she no longer sexy?
Yeah.
And I think that this is the point where Ginger decides,
yeah,
this is too much for me.
Yeah.
This power is coming with too many caveats.
Right.
And my tail is too long.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and they're, like, trying to, like, tape it down and, like, stuff like that. And I think that, you know, at what point... You know, I think one of the reasons why I like this sort of slow burn sort of turning is because it plays into so much. There's a really strong aspect of body horror. They utilize body horror, and it really does beg the question: like, at what point does this sort of like supernatural element to her become like abject, instead of alluring?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that when her main concern as a character is, I think, the social repercussions and the power.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that at this point she's gotten the power. She's gotten a taste of it. She likes it. And then she's like, this tail and like these claws and like all the further monstrosity. Because she was trying to shave herself too.
Yeah.
And she was shaving herself and the razor's all like bloody and fucked up. And it's because it's gotten to be too much. Now she's crossed the line into where she thinks it's too masculine.
Yeah.
It's too, you know.
It's becoming ugly.
Yeah.
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 And I think that is why she tries to cut off her tail. And she's crying in the bathroom. And I don't know if it's because she's tired of consuming, if she feels guilt, or if she literally just wants to be pretty again. I'm not sure which it is, and I'm not sure if it's a combination of all those things. But I do think that Ginger is very influenced by the people around her.
Yeah, I mean, especially, you know, like after she sort of turns and after, you know, like I think that she sort of, a part of her hunt is sort of like using sort of like her like allure and stuff like that, her like sort of like, you know, what you described as like a glow up, and then but if she doesn't have that, then like it sort of becomes like, well, she's just simply aggressive, she's just an animal, and I think that becomes maybe a little bit too much for her.
And I think she wants more than that.
And she has to face the fact that Bridget was right all along, because Bridget's trying to tell her like, there's something wrong with you, and she's just kind of like, no, like, you know,
she's like, this is awesome.
Yeah, you're like a loser, like, get away from
you're
me.
a loser and I'm hot. So
exactly.
Actually,
and so I think that she has to sort of face the fact that like Bridget has maybe more I think she has more of an understanding of the situation, and she also is sort of like she has her own capabilities, and I think that scares Ginger. Yeah.
Okay. Act 3.
Yes.
Ginger gets trapped in the bathroom. She escapes. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, it's okay. No, it's like, I mean, I think that scene is really interesting because you also see like her gross nails, and she's like scratching at the door, and she's
it
sort
gets
of
all bloody.
Yeah, she's like pounding on the door. And then I also think it's interesting because you know, they tried like the silver belly button ring technique, and then they
Yes.
also they tried. I think it's really interesting that the sort of herbal remedy that they're gonna make comes from their mom's crafts project, and I think that's so that was
Yeah.
so intentional, and I feel like so fitting
Yeah.
because the mom has sort of the source of the cure.
Yeah, the mom has the solutions.
Yep.
But they don't have eyes to see, you
Right,
know?
yeah.
Like they don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it.
Yeah.
They think it's cringe.
Yeah.
They think, "Oh, mom, you have a healthy outlook on life and like to see the bright and positive things in life. Oh, I freaking hate you, dude." Like
Yeah.
like that's kind of their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really funny, but I think that you're right. Like the mom in her like craftiness and her like healthy hobbies, she has this thing that Bridget is coveting so much, and she just had to ask.
Yeah.
She just had to be like, "Can I have this?" The mom's like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
Like, I don't care.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting that when they're talking, when Bridget and Sam are sort of trying to devise a plan to sort of cure this like lycanthropy that Bridget, you know, takes the fall for.
Yeah.
She says, or Sam says something to the effect of, I think this was about the belly button thing, the belly button ring, the silver, and he's like, oh, like, you know, the ancients believe that, you know, silver was purifying and like it could purify the blood, like blah blah blah. And then Bridget says like, well, they also like believed in witches. And then he gives her the ring and he says they do.
Yeah.
Like as in present tense, you know, like.
Yeah.
So I think that there's sort of this element of like this sort of like supernatural like sort of healing ability being passed down from like the mom to like Bridget. And I think that like I don't think that like, you know, it's saying that Bridget is a witch, but I think it's saying that like inherently I think female friendships are just always that way, where they just sort of have this supernatural ability to sort of like be caring and to sort of like know people and understand people like when other people don't see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, like Bridget like has the key to help Ginger, but she got it from her mom.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. I really like that reading of it too.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, let's get into like the nitty gritty, the main conflict.
Yes.
When Ginger is at the school killing people. She kills the guidance counselor
Yes.
because she's flashing those guys. Because here, I think she wants to get another meal before she can't. I think that might be part of it. She wants to get another kill before it's too much.
Yeah.
You know? So she's flashing these guys. She's trying to attract them, and they're like, "Oh, good." And then the guidance counselor is like, "Dude, what is going on here?"
Yeah, and I like how her face. You can see her face sort of starting to change, and these guys are like, what is wrong with you?" But then the moment she flashes them, they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
You know, so they're like, I think that
just like in Jennifer's Body, it's like the guys like they'll notice odd things, and they'll be like, "Oh, what's that?" And then it's like, "Oh, boobs."
Yeah, they just sort of have that like sort of like silly like teenager kind of like impulsiveness where they just sort of like disregard every other you know thing that's happening like around them.
Every other red flag.
Yep, they're just desperate.
Yeah, they don't notice that their friend has been gone for like 3 days.
Yeah, they don't.
Like
that's going out the window for boobs.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So, so there's this conflict. She kills the janitor. What I really want to get into is it feels like she has like an ending, kind of not a monologue, but she has this ending kind of like conversation with Bridget where she says, having this type of power, she says, it's like touching yourself. You know every move, and after it's fireworks, it's supernovas. I really like that line.
Yeah.
And then it leads into the incest stuff.
Yeah, and preceding that though, there's also I really, really, really like that line where she says, "I'm a goddamn force of nature. I could do just about anything right now."
Yeah.
Which I think is sort of like, I feel like it's a commentary on, you know, she's obviously a werewolf, so that's a very like natural sort of. I think being a werewolf is like that's like a natural sort of monstrosity, but I think it also is a commentary on sort of like femininity and sort of like that, like the really, really primal sort of like femininity where you're just sort of like, I could literally do anything like right now. Like I'm literally a force of nature. Like you were so like bound to like the world around you and just sort of like the people around you.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Like, yeah. And I'm a force of nature. I'm creating supernovas.
Right. Yeah.
You
Like
know?
I'm taking control and like I'm gonna, you know, I think in a lot of ways she meant that like not just sexually. I think that she meant that like aggressively.
Yeah,
you know,
with her force.
With her force. Yeah.
Yeah. At this point, she's almost like completed her transformation.
Yeah.
She's like on the way. I think that the line "swap some juice" is really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that can be interpreted to be anything.
Ways.
Yeah. But I like notoriously though it's interpreted sexually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Bridget goes really far. She says, "I'd rather be dead than be what you are."
Yeah.
And with the queer reading, it's like, you'd rather be dead than be gay.
Yeah.
But, you know, in the literal reading, you know.
I'd rather be dead than be a werewolf.
Than be a werewolf. Than be aggressive. Than be hypersexual.
A monster.
Yeah, than be monstrous. But with the queer reading, it's like, I'd rather be dead than be gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating. And it's fascinating that of the two, she is the one who's kind of like the straight one.
I think after that, like shit kind of goes down, and there's definitely, you know, we see like the full transformation of Ginger, well, okay, first of all, we should probably talk about the mom in the van part, because you know Ginger gets out, and then Bridget's sort of looking for Ginger, and they have this. I really really like that moment, in the van when they're sort of like having like a one-on-one, and I feel like that it really like allows like I like how they sort of fleshed out the mom's character like a lot more, and I think it also they touched on so many different aspects of femininity, and I really like how they touch on motherhood and sort of like the horrors of motherhood. And there's that sort of part where the mom, you know, I like how the mom covers for the daughters. She sort of finds the fingers, and she's sort of like, oh, like they're fake, like they're from the, you know, the girls' project. Then
she calls her husband a big baby.
Yeah, she
That's
like,
hilarious.
yeah, she sort of like, you know, makes this face where you understand that she understands, and then she goes and she digs in the crawl space, and she, I really really like how it sort of she's digging and you don't see what she finds, but she sort of stifles that scream.
Yeah.
And then she goes and she picks up Bridget.
Yeah.
And she, I really really like how she, you know, is appalled by what they have done, but she's like, but you know, you guys are my babies. And she says that she feels like she can't tell anyone because everyone will blame her. And I was like, that is such a powerful moment, because I feel like that, you know, we talk about like the lineage of that maternal sort of like lineage, and like the way that women are sort of connected to each other, and how they pass things down. I feel like it sort of also it shows that it goes the other way, where you know, the sort of like violence and the horrors and the crimes of her daughters are passed back up to her, and everyone will blame her, and it's sort of like outside, this sort of supernatural forces outside of her control, but it's still all leads back to her, because everyone blames the mom and they blame the woman.
It is like a really like incredible allegory for motherhood, because it's like at the end of the day, you create this thing that you have no control over. You have no control over like the beauty that it creates, but also like any terror or like pain that like it causes. And then you're right, it all gets put back on you, because it's a reflection of like, well, you raised them. Yeah
Exactly. And so I like, every time I watch that, like I have like so much like love for the mom, and it's just, I just know that had whoever was like writing that like had whoever was in the writing room, that had to have been like something that they were dealing with, because it was that was such like a unique and like raw moment.
It's either the mother they had or the mother they wanted, because she's such a stellar mom.
She is such a stellar mom. But I think that, so after that, the mom is kind of like lost to the party. She sort of gets lost, and she gets separated from Bridget, and then Bridget ends up going back to the house with Sam and with Ginger in the back, and that's when in the back I really, really want to talk about the special effects. Because, oh my gosh. I think it's the way that they did it is so interesting, because I think that werewolf movies, there aren't as many werewolf movies as there are like vampire movies, because of just like the practicality is so difficult.
To do practical effects for a werewolf movie is
Yeah.
such a, like, impossible feat.
It
Not
is,
impossible,
because
but just, like, highly, highly difficult, so involved.
yeah, and I mean, there's always this sort of question of like how much of the person are you going to keep and how much of the wolf are you going to have.
Yeah.
Like what's that balance going to be like? And it's so hard to sort of like create, because humans are bipedal, wolves are like they walk on all fours, so it's like
Yeah.
hard to keep that balance, and it's sort of like it's just really really hard to sort of also like show things changing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that this movie had like that big of a budget, so I mean I imagine like that was probably very difficult for them to sort of like negotiate like how they were going to do this. And so I thought that well, first of all, I think that the movie plays really really well into sort of the aspect of like like the interpretation of things as opposed to like showing them. So I think throughout the movie they sort of like you interpret things but you don't necessarily show them. Like when the mom sort of finds the body in the basement, you don't see the body but you sort of see her face.
Yeah.
And so and you just interpret like she found the body, and it's sort of scary.
Yeah.
And then I really like how in the back of the van, when Ginger is sort of turning into this werewolf, I like how it sort of uses the streetlights passing and sort of these flashes of dark and light to sort of show like the passage of time, the passage of space, and then also these intervals where she's making these physical changes. Her skin is sort of like turning and like stuff like that. You can sort of, and the blood's sort of coming out of her mouth. And so I think that was like a really, really effective like practical way for them to show that she's turning into something, as opposed to just seeing her like just turn in real time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's pretty crucial for a low budget movie like that.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And I want to get into the very end now.
Yeah.
So the very end, when Bridget says, "I'm not going to die in this room with you," they're, like you said, they're in the crawl spaces.
Yeah.
They're in like this like weird like back of the house, under the house, in all of these small tight spaces.
Yeah.
Okay, Sam gets killed. Don't care about him.
Well, I think that the part of Sam getting killed, though, like again, is the interpretation as opposed to showing.
Yeah.
And that part always really scares me, and it always makes me jump because
you hear so much.
You hear a lot.
You see anything.
Exactly. And so you just like primally that like that's a big scary predator.
Yeah.
And you see like I like how it shows sort of also the door banging, and you see Bridget's face.
Yeah.
You sort of like know that something really bad is like happening. And you sort of like empathize with her, and so like the fear is like very infectious.
Yeah.
And then you also see like a lot of blood. And then before, the big showdown with Bridget and Ginger, I really like how she sort of follows the blood and the blood trail, and she sort of finds her. And I really, really like how she's like a full wolf now.
Yeah.
She's a full werewolf.
Yeah.
And I really, really love how Bridget like sort of gets down on all fours and she crawls towards her like an animal.
She's emulating her.
And I mean, before this, when they were in the school, they did swap blood. They made the blood pact.
Yes.
Because Bridget was sort of, I think, giving in, and she's just like, if you want me, just fucking have me, stop hurting other people.
Yeah.
And then Bridget starts in the basement. She crawls over to where Sam was sort of like, I love how he's like huffing and stuff, because it reminds me of like all the times that I've watched, like I used to be really, really into like wolf documentaries, because I was such a wolf girl as a kid, and so I used to watch wolf documentaries, and there were so many moments where like the wolves would be sort of devouring like a deer alive, and the deer would sort of be like huffing, and it's like in shock, and it's bloody, and it's huffing. And to me that like they played that through really well in the movie, because Sam's sitting there and he's sort of huffing and he's bleeding out, and he has this one girl and this monster on the other side, and they're sort of like licking up the blood on either side of him.
Yeah.
And you're sort of like left to wonder, like, is she turning? Like, you don't really know. And she sort of like hacks up the blood, and then she says, I can't do it. And that's how Ginger turns against her. And I think that's such like a beautiful metaphor for like how Bridget can't swallow the things that Ginger wants her to, when she can't handle the things that Ginger wants her to do or to be, Ginger turns on her. Yeah. And sort of like, it gets really aggressive.
And hurts the things that she cares about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that was, to me, that was like so like effective, and like, well, I think that's like probably like my favorite part of like the whole movie. Yeah. So, and I think it also shows the crawling part. I think it also shows Bridget's attempt to at least get down onto Ginger's level. Yeah. And to like try to like be a good sister.
Yeah. And she's doing her best there.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, she just doesn't have the same cruelty.
The appetite. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But the end, did you notice how much there's a lot of cross imagery in the movie? But especially at the end, with the way that
Oh.
the pictures are framed. So it's like picture on one side, picture on another, and then three, they
Oh.
shape a cross. And then at the very end, you zoom out and you've got the light coming in from their room and the beaded windows, and it forms another cross. At the end.
Of course, Jenny's Catholic ass would recognize this.
Yeah, but I love the crosses because, in a way, Ginger has just been crucified.
Mm-hmm.
And you could say it's the patriarchy, you could say that it's queer phobia, but at the end of the day, a child just died.
Yeah.
A child was just, her life is over.
Yeah.
And I love that the pictures that they took make the cross. Because it's like, here is what they thought that this would be.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the tragic reality.
Yeah.
Here is, like, this romanticized version of, like what they thought, you know, like, the symbolism would mean. And it's almost kind of like how you look. People romanticize, like, Jesus Christ on the cross.
Yeah, well, have you ever seen Piss Christ? Like,
No.
the artwork? Okay, so this guy had, like, this artist, he put this, like, basically, like, this crucifix, like, Jesus on the cross, he put it in, like, a jar of piss. And people got really, really mad. But he did it because he wanted to show, like, how, like, people romanticize, like, the crucifixion. And, like, but it's actually, like, a horrific form of, like, capital punishment.
Yeah.
So you're so right.
Especially Catholics, they romanticize the cross. And here were these girls putting pictures of their death into a cross form. They're romanticizing this death.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, the real cross, the reality of their room, the reality of, like, what their room looks like, it is jarring.
Yeah.
And it is horrific. And it kind of parallels, like, what you were saying, where, like, crucifixion is a terrible, like, way to die.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it goes back to that thing where it's like they don't understand it. They don't understand the reality. And it's like, here is this, like, imagined reality of, like, this is what our sacrifice is going to be. This is what we're going to look like. And actually, it is truly tragic.
Yeah.
When you look at it from, this is what actually happened, it's just sad. It's just tragic. It's just, you know, a girl holding her sister as she dies.
As she dies, yeah. And I think that it's also really, like, tragic in the aspect that, like, I think that there's that really defining moment and that sort of really, like, cathartic moment where, you know, Bridget says, you know, she's like, I'm not gonna die in this room with you, and then Ginger, like, attacks her and then she gets, like, stabbed. But I think that that, you know, in conjunction with the sort of, like, cross imagery, it definitely shows that, like, Ginger, like, there's almost this sense that Ginger had to die in order for Bridget to keep going, because otherwise, like, if Ginger had lived, would Bridget have also died? Like, would they have, was that inevitable? You know, I think it brings up, like, a lot of questions.
Yeah, would they have been stuck with one another?
Exactly.
And this, like, you know, like, their plan was, like, out by 16 or dead in the scene.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that was, like, you know, I think there's a part where the mom says something to the effect of, like, I really wish that you would sort of form your own ideas and stop following Ginger. You know, you're sort of, like, always under her thumb and stuff like that. And I think that was, like, such, like, a moment of strength for Bridget to be like, I'm not dying in this room. Like, so.
My life is my own.
Exactly.
And you can do what you want to do, but I'm going to do what I need to do.
Exactly.
To survive.
Yeah. Like, whether you live or die.
Yeah.
So, wow.
Sad.
I love werewolves. I love werewolves so much.
I
Like,
love this movie.
I love this movie too. Yeah. And I love the color palette. I think me and Jenny were talking about, like, how purpley this movie was.
Yeah.
And how, like, earth tony it was.
Yeah. The girls today, they're going to eat this up. The earth tone girlies.
The earth tone girlies. Yeah. Love ginger snaps.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that there's just so many things to say about this. I'm sure, like, I'm gonna walk out of the studio today and be like, oh, like, I wish I had talked about that, like, that or something. And I really wish that, I think that, like, nowadays vampires are getting, like, a lot of love, and I really, really do wish that werewolves were getting, like, the same amount of love, because they're such, like, an underrated, like, monster.
Yeah.
And especially, like, for women, I feel like they're so underrated because or they're just not out there because you know, again, people don't want to see hairy women, I guess.
No.
Yeah.
But they should want to.
Yeah, they should want to, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's episode 2.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. Boom. Done.
Bye.